Thanks, Tajan, for joining us again. Let's get into it. What is imposter syndrome?
So, first of all, I think the term was first coined as imposter phenomenon by two psychologists, Clance and Imes, in the 70s. And at that time, they did research and a lot of work around what they saw as this kind of consistent observation of folks who were perfectly qualified, perfectly capable, who still felt like they were imposters, like they were being fraudulent in their work capacity, i.e. just folks who there was just a disconnect between their actual skill and competence and how they experienced that. And that huge, like just a huge blind spot for several people in the workplace. Since then, I can't say it has been very thoroughly studied. However, since then, that term has now kind of morphed into imposter syndrome. And there are lots of folks who intentionally do not say imposter syndrome in an attempt to avoid pathologizing people. What we know about imposter phenomenon is that it's very common, and most people who are working, at least 70%, according to at least a few studies on this, are saying that at least most of us will have some imposter feelings at some point in our careers. So it's very common. Oftentimes, though, the language of imposter syndrome tends to be in just modern training spaces, be very much tied with women, and be very much tied to women's empowerment type training and education. So there are very few women's empowerment training opportunities that you'll see that don't have some kind of component around addressing imposter syndrome. When really, initially, when those studies were done by Clance and Imes, even then it was not something that they were observing uniquely in women and not men. I think the way women and men react to and respond to imposter phenomenon looks different. That much we do know, but there isn't anything indicating that women experience this more than men or vice versa. But we do respond, but there are some gender implications around how people respond to things.
Mm-hmm. I'm really curious about that. But before we get there, I want to backtrack a little bit. You said some individuals are not using the phrase imposter syndrome anymore because, and I can understand this and appreciate this. And I always like to kind of stay up to date with the language and to use language that's going to be empowering for people. What is suggested instead? What would people say instead?
One could say imposter phenomenon as the original researchers in the 70s termed it.
Mm-hmm.
The syndrome term came
see.
later.
Makes it sound like the person is sick.
Yes.
They have some kind of sickliness or syndrome.
Yeah.
Okay. The second thing that I was curious about is this, how it manifests or how it presents differently in women versus men. What have you seen or what have you read? So that people who are listening can know, okay, if this is what I am experiencing, this may actually be imposter phenomenon.
I would say for the folks who are feeling like there has been some major blow to their confidence, some major incident, or maybe it's not even necessarily a major incident. It could be a significant role transition. It could be a demotion. It could be tough feedback that leaves folks, for whatever reason, feeling very unconfident and insecure in their position, despite the fact that the evidence against that is huge. So meaning colleagues around them actually experience them as being very competent, highly qualified. These folks may tend to be folks who may withdraw for fear of being outed, for fear of their ignorance or lack of sophistication, lack of knowledge being put on complete display. These are folks who tend to probably self-identify themselves quickly as having imposter phenomenon. They'll be quick to say like, oh yeah, I'm having imposter feelings here around this. So that's one flavor of how it may present. The other flavor of how it may present as someone who may show up being like, Tajan, I'm just feeling so overwhelmed. And when we peel back the layers of the source of overwhelm, if the source of overwhelm has nothing to do with the system, meaning, they're not in a stressful environment, they're not in an environment that's asking for them to do more than they are able, but that in fact, this is this self-created overwork that has been kind of created by them. Oftentimes when you peel back the layers of that and say, well, why do you think you need to be overworking in this manner? The mindset and thinking underlying that tends to be something along the lines of, if I don't do it perfectly every single time, all of the time, I will be judged and outed. I will be judged and excommunicated. So to avoid judgment and blame, I'm going to run faster, harder, do more, be more. I'm going to show and prove that I belong. I have to earn my seat at the table every day. My past qualifications is never enough. I'm only as good as my last deliverable. And so this perfectionism will tend to spill over into overwhelm, and that's not sustainable. So at some point in the coaching context, you will see that, or folks will come like, help, I'm overwhelmed or burnt out. But when you peel back every single layer, it's just a different type of imposter phenomenon. So those folks are not going to be able to identify themselves. They're not going to hold up their hands and say, oh yeah, I have imposter feelings, but it is in fact that.
So for those who, let's say, are in a space that's psychologically safe and who are experiencing overwhelm secondary to this imposter phenomenon, after you've peeled back all of the layers, what are some of the ways that you work with that individual? What are some of the tips that have come out of your work?
To start with, it would be important for that person to clarify where the roots of this thinking lives. So where are the roots of these imposter feelings? Did that show up in childhood? Right? Or not? Like, where are the roots of it? So understanding the roots of it is important. Most people don't have imposter feelings in every single circumstance. So they may feel this way at work and not feel this way in personal relationships. So it's important, just even that critique and increasing their level of awareness around this and education is helpful.
Or vice versa, they may feel this in personal relationships and not at work.
Absolutely.
Which is where the therapist comes in.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there is that too. So understanding the roots and then understanding the triggers. Because oftentimes too, folks may not feel triggered by imposter phenomenon in every single workplace situation. So it's important to kind of start to like really understand where and how this is showing up. So for example, a coachee may say to me, you know what? I'm never triggered by this when I'm talking to my direct reports. I'm only triggered by this when I'm in a situation where I feel like I don't know everything. Or I'm only triggered by this when I'm in a situation where I'm talking to the C-suite. So getting really clear on your triggers is going to be helpful for folks to figure out when and how to intervene. When we get to practical and tactical strategies and tools, then you need to know when to use them so that you're not coming into these meetings and coming into these situations where you know you will likely be triggered with no just naked, right? A big part of the work is understanding what the negative self-talk is that is driving this behavior. and countering it. Often it's very thin narratives that are unexamined. And so one key strategy is based in cognitive behavioral therapy, really, just getting people to just practicing cognitive challenging and getting people to challenge and examine the evidence of some automatic negative thoughts that they may have. So being able to identify those thinking traps of fortune telling or mind reading or black or white thinking or all of these kind of automatic negative thoughts, these common thinking traps, and kind of seeing how they get sucked into them and what are those trapdoors that they're falling into, and then thinking through A, how do we challenge that, and B, how do we thicken the narrative in general around a lot of this? Because for them, for a lot of folks who are struggling with this, the narrative can be super thin. The narrative can look like, I have to stay late, work harder, do more, etc., because I'm trying to get to the next level, and I have to do that to get there. Or just notions that are unexamined completely.
Roots, triggers, identifying narrative, challenging automatic negative thoughts are 4 tips that you might be able to give to someone that you're working with.
Yeah. And the final one I would add on that too is surrounding yourself with resources and people who can help ground you, but doing that intentionally. So you don't want to be surrounding yourself with people or sharing this with people who are going to further keep you entrenched in this. So whether or not that looks like having a coach or a therapist or a particular friend that's really able to help you ground yourself when you're in a shame spiral, right? So being very intentional about proactively seeking help, proactively reaching out to certain people to get support as you are doing the work is also really important. As far as we know, men experience this probably just as much as women, right? Like, so if a man is transitioning from being a director to a CEO, it's highly likely that they may feel some sort of imposter feelings about this. Like, can I really do this? Am I, equipped, prepared for it, right? But there's a difference between healthy levels of self-doubt and imposter phenomenon. So healthy levels of self-doubt is normal. If you're doing something different, having a healthy level of self-doubt that isn't crippling, debilitating, creating anxiety, creating distress. Again, really what distinguishes these two is the emotional response to it and the behavior. So I just wanted to put that out there. There is that difference. And in the coaching context, that can be unpacked. Men tend to, when they're really faced with imposter phenomenon, surround themselves with people who know less than them. People so they're in situations where that imposter phenomenon can never be exposed because everybody knows less than me. Whereas women tend to head headlong into this based on our current research on this. I think this field in general needs to be much more researched, but based on what we know so far, women will just leap headlong into the environment. There's no avoiding of the environment per se. And grapple with all of the emotions and feelings and everything else while there. But there isn't like this intentional, like, and I'm going to surround myself with people who are never as good as me, who never make me feel like I am not the master here. And also a lot of folks tend to think that people of color experience this more so than white folks. But again, not necessarily. However, if folks are in an environment that would make people of color, lead people of color to believe that like they're not good enough, they're not smart enough, they're not ready. That exacerbates it. It does. So that it isn't to say that people of color uniquely experience this more, but if we are collectively and often in environments that exacerbate this and entrench it, then yes, we are also impacted significantly more if we are in these environments that make this entrenched.